My final rant of the day. Well, for honestly, major rant, I guess I could say. So, there was an article that came out from GameSpot this week talking about, they interviewed Shinji Mikami, I guess you could say the creator of the Resident Evil franchise. They had a chance to interview him at Gamescom this year, which happened, say, roughly a week or two ago. And a quote they took from that interview was that he thinks that modern games are taking themselves way too freaking seriously. And the truth is, at least in my opinion, let me show you guys the article here. In my opinion, he is very much correct about that. Now, when he made this statement, he was referring to the upcoming remaster that they're working on at Grasshopper Interactive, which is the remaster of Shadows of the Damned, which is a game that I also enjoyed way back in 2012 when I played it on stream way back then. That was a stream that happened a long time ago. But I enjoyed that game because it didn't take itself too seriously, because it embraced the fact that it was a video game and it wore it on its sleeves, which is the very thing he talks about in this interview, is the fact that Shadows of the Damned is very much a game that wears the fact that it's a video game on its sleeves. And is proud of that. But then it got me thinking, because I also watched another interview, which is it's not this one specifically. It was one in regards to these very two same people here in this thumbnail. They had a chance to sit down and play Sonic and Shadow Generations at Gamescom. They played a demo of that. And a common sentiment I kept hearing in this interview over and over again was that Sonic, the game, is a video game as video game. And while obviously this is the guy who heard the rant, I know who this guy is, by the way. This is Dan Reichert. While he enjoyed the fact that it was a video game as video game, you could tell the sentiment from the other guy was, yeah, I guess that's okay. But to add on to that, I also watched before the release of, well, I guess you can call it the release now, the release of Space Marine 2. I watched some people who had a chance to play the game. This was Access Media. Had a chance to play the game before release. I watched this guy play it for an hour. And a common thing I kept hearing all throughout that video is, boy, this is a video game ass video game. God, this is a video game ass video game. And I kept hearing that. And at one point, he catches the fact that he keeps saying it all throughout the video and tries to hedge it by saying, it's a video game ass video game. But, that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's like, if it wasn't a bad thing, then why did you feel the need to reiterate the fact that it's a video game as a video game about a good 3 to 4 times throughout your entire hour-long video? So my question then becomes, since when did video games being exactly that become a bad thing? This is a common sentiment that I hear all across Access Media in general and gaming publications, is when a game tries to be itself, acknowledges that it's a video game, and embraces that, even leans into it, somehow, for some reason, that is almost looked at as a detriment to what it is. While at the same time, that very same person from Access Media, and for those of you who know me and have been around my community long enough, you can probably figure out who it is I'm talking about. I'm not going to say the name here because I'm not trying to draw negativity to these people specifically. Because, truth be told, this isn't about them. This is about this sentiment that video games being video games is a bad thing. Anyways, back to my point. I then watched the video of them, this video released in the exact same day, roughly an hour apart from each other. There was another video from the new Astro that came out today. And throughout that entire video, you could hear them getting almost somewhat a little bit of emotional because of the content in the game, which harkens back to the legacy of PlayStation. We're talking the legacy from games like Ratchet and Clank, Jak and Daxter, Crash Bandicoot. The list goes on. And you could tell they were kind of like, oh, God, video games are never like this anymore. Wow, I kind of miss this stuff. You could hear that sentiment in their voices as they played the game. But when you look at Astrobot from a gameplay perspective, Astrobot is very much a video game in the line with those exact games that came out back in the early 2000s. When games were not afraid to be video games. So you almost criticize a game for being a video game while at the same time praising another game for being exactly that. And what I've seen, at least in the general gaming public anyways, especially when that Astro Bot trailer was revealed, is that when all the other games that they showed, like Concord, for example, wasn't quite hitting with people, the minute they showed off Astro Bot, people were like, holy shit, what is this? I gotta get this. A game that by every definition is a video game as video game. There's been this weird concerted push. And again, this is a drum that I've been banging for years now, in regards to what the fuck is going on with video games being video games. As somebody who enjoys a video game being a video game. Over the past 20 or so odd years, there's been a real concerted push to move video games away from being video games, right? When you got games like Metal Gear Solid, The Last of Us, games that lean heavily on the cinematic aspect of them, almost movie quality like, I guess, nature to them. There was a real push for that. Why? Because it was popular. Everybody wanted to do that. Everybody wanted to be the next Metal Gear Solid. Everybody wanted to be the next Last of Us at the time. And because of that, people started pushing away from the video game aspect, no longer focusing on that to make sure that their games looked great, looked like a movie, felt like a movie, sounded like a movie, played like a movie. Well, played is kind of an oxymoron in this case, but you get the idea. And because of that, gameplay has kind of suffered. There hasn't been any real push to innovate in that regard because no one's focusing on that. And even more so, and it's not to say that this is the industry's fault as a whole, I also put some of the blame of this on us, the gamers, because the industry tends to move where the money is. And during that time, during the early days, games like a Crash Bandicoot or a Jak and Daxter or what are the platforms, like a Sly Cooper, at some point, they started falling out of favor. People weren't buying them anymore. And I remember to this day, there always used to be real, like, especially in the old game trailers days, especially on the forums. I remember to this day, there would be constant console flame wars about people calling a console not good because of the quality of games it had on it. Especially during the early days of, let's say, PlayStation 3, for example. There's a lot of people that were harking on PlayStation saying, oh, this is the adult console. This is the game where real adults play video games. None of that kiddie shit on Nintendo. None of that shit on the Wii. That's all kid shit. We only play adult games here on the Xbox. So when all the sales are leaning towards games that are pushing gameplay aside for the fact of making games that are more cinematic, more movie-like, it's not really a surprise that a lot of that got lost in translation over the past 20 years. So yeah, we as gamers do bear some part of the blame of that. And you can't figure out why you have so many games that feel incredibly bland and samey. You have a ton of open world AAA games that come out. And the whole open world component of these games these days, especially considering that Ubisoft took the world by storm with the first and second Assassin's Creed games, which established an open world foundation that many, I would even say most, AAA open world games still borrow from today. As a foundation, I can still count the amount of games I've played in the past year that still have you either climbing a tower to unlock part of the map or doing something similar to reveal part of the map. In the same way that those Assassin's Creed games did way back in the day. That shit still happens even now. And you can't figure out why all these games feel so bland, so boring, so samey, while all these open world games tend to run together and never feel that different. Even games like Elden Ring, a game that I loved, still borrowed some components of that. So is there a shift happening now for people that want to see games go back to embracing what they are, liking the fact that they're video games, enjoying the fact that they're video games, celebrating the fact that they're video games? I don't know. I would like to see that. It's a drum that I've been beating for almost a decade now. But this is a wait and see situation. And I don't know what else to in regards to what to do in that field. So perhaps Astrobot, assuming it sells well, Maybe that'll be a push in the right direction. Maybe a game like Black Myth Wukong will be a push in that same direction. Although, to be fair, one of the major criticisms I keep hearing about Black Myth Wukong is that it's not open world. Oh, God. Boy, I sure wish this game was open world. I sure as hell don't. I actually like the kind of game that it is. It's not open world, but it's big enough for you to get lost in. Not every game needs to be open world. That's kind of the problem today. A lot of the money that goes into these games that it kind of inflates the budgets is the fact that they keep trying to push for all that stuff in the games. Like, it takes a lot of time and resources to fill an open space that large. And somehow Black Myth Wukong managed to find, at least in my opinion, a pretty good balance of that, where it being linear while also being incredibly open at the same time. Where I've heard complaints of people getting lost in the game considering that it's not open world, or complaints that the game needs a map, which maybe it does, but I don't need it to be open world. I think that's stupid. We have plenty of those kinds of games already, and like I said, when you keep making open world games, you're going to fall into that checklist that I guess people call it the Ubisoft checklist these days, of having to go down and do specific events all throughout the game to make sure you do 100% in each area. Whereas Black Myth Wukong avoids that by giving you some side quests every now and then, depending on what NPCs you talk to. And you can choose to do that, you can choose to not do that. And I think that's great. And if they were to make a sequel, I would like to see them continue on in that regard while also improving on that idea in the future. It doesn't need to be open world. We got plenty of that shit already. But somehow, over the past 20 years, the idea of fun in video games, because the at some point in time, we forgot the idea that video games are supposed to be fun. I wish I had the image right here. You know, that one image, that one meme of Neil Druckmann from Naughty Dog fame saying that we don't use the word fun in their office. This was in regards to them working on The Last of Us, obviously, because that game was obviously darker in tone, and they were trying to avoid the idea of it being a wacky video game, which there is a place for that. I'm not saying that those kinds of games shouldn't exist, but what I am saying is that we're getting a lot of games like that now because everybody wants to be that adult cinematic experience. Video games and developers, they've grown up now. They're not kids anymore. They don't enjoy that kind of thing. Since when? Since when? What, are you afraid the wife and kids are going to see you playing Crash Bandicoot? Better not let them see me play Mario. That might be a bad thing. They might think I'm a child. It's like, it's no wonder that Nintendo still resonates with the crowd today, even the younger audiences, because it embraces the fact that its games are games. That is why Nintendo never really has any of these issues. And if anybody has been around my community long enough, you know that I play a wide variety of games. I can sit down, I can play a game like The Last of Us or Resident Evil, and then immediately jump into a Mario or a Sonic the Hedgehog or a Crash Bandicoot and have no problem with that. And not give a fuck who sees it. And I've always been that way. Oh no, people are going to think that I'm a bad gamer because I'm playing Kirby? That's a baby game. What? And you wonder why your games feel so bland. Why there's no variety. And the push for incredible realism on top of that, which is great in terms of graphic technology, but then you end up in the events you're seeing now where everybody's hiring all these A-list Hollywood celebrities to fill in these roles to become these models in games, and you know that shit's not cheap. You don't hire an A-list celebrity to put their likeness and voice in your game for a couple $1,000. Ain't no fucking way. Anyways, that's my general rant about what's going on with video games these days. And this article alone just kind of set me off on that because I kept seeing like this article was one part of it. But then watching people play some of the recent games that came out this week, almost complaining about them being video games, but then praising Astrobot for being exactly that. It was the weirdest contrast, the strangest form of hypocrisy I've ever seen. All happening within an hour of each other. And I thought that shit was wild. Like, oh, right, video games are supposed to be fun. I forgot about that. Holy shit. Did you know that video games can be fun? What Excalibur in the chat says to phrase C.S. Lewis, maturity is not caring about looking childish. Thank you. Like, I have never once cared about who saw me playing Kirby. Like, my youngest niece, who was like 4 at the time, caught me playing Kirby, and her first question was, "Can I play?" To which I said, yes, obviously. There was no embarrassment that she walked in and saw me playing a fucking Kirby game. I was actually happy that she was interested. Okay. Anyways, that's all I got for now. I am 6 minutes over the time I'm supposed to stop for this podcast. My voice is already leaving me, I can tell. But the major takeaways from a lot of this is, for this week's episode that I would like people to take away at least, is that there is obviously I guess you could even say a cultural shift happening in video games, where a lot of the serious dark tone games are kind of getting pushed by the wayside. Even more so when they suffer from things like politics in them, especially real world politics like we have today, whether it be gender identity, racial politics, the list goes on. People are kind of tired of that shit. And I can't blame them. As a as a black person, I am also tired of racial politics in all the games I played this year and last. One of the major things that I really disliked about Alan Wake 2, which is a game I waited years for, considering I loved the first Alan Wake, and I could not have rolled my eyes harder during the moment when Saga Anderson says, "Oh, it's another white man. I'm so tired of another white man telling me what to do." I couldn't have rolled my eyes harder during that moment. I'm so tired of that shit. That wasn't the sole reason why I felt so bad, I felt so not so great about that game in general, but it was definitely a component. And I wish I had more time to get into that right now, but unfortunately, with me being at the end of the podcast, I cannot. But there's a whole host of issues about why I did not care for Alan Wake 2. As somebody who loved the first game, I was very disappointed with this. And then you hear the news about them. Oh, we're gonna make a TV series with Alan Wake in control. And I'm like, for fuck's sake! This whole idea of pushing things to be movies or turning movies into games, games into movies. This is the shit I can't stand. Because they're trying to bridge that gap, and I think it's unnecessary because now you're killing what makes video games great to begin with to turn them into movies. That's what started all this shit. Again, I'm not saying these games can't or shouldn't exist. I'm saying that the push, because these games became popular during a certain time frame, has kind of ruined the aspect of video games that make them special to begin with. Speak with your wallets, and we definitely did back then. And because we did back then, it pushed a lot of those video game components, or the games that were video games and proud to be so, out. So you don't get those wild, ridiculous games like a Shadows of the Dam with with what people consider childish humor. You're not going to get that anymore. Not just because, oh, the social climate has changed and people don't like that kind of, people aren't akin to those kinds of jokes anymore, but because nobody was buying them. And again, part of this is on us, the gamers, for this. Not all of it, but we bear some part of the blame. So going into the future, you support the games that you want to see more of. Don't just sit on the sidelines and think that somebody's going to do it for you. And don't be afraid to play a video game that is in fact a video game and is proud of that, because you will find more often than not that you will have yourselves spending more time on a game where gameplay is at the utmost importance, as opposed to everything else, where you put the controller down and watch it all happen in front of you. I've gone back to far more games recently, slightly retro, to relatively recently, that I put gameplay at the forefront. And I can tell you this much. When I pull up that controller and I start playing, I will spend far more time with that game than I will with a game that has a shit ton of cutscenes from the jump.